Aliens called humans threatening. Sooner or later, the day they needed us arrived. Part 1. The warning they laughed at. The hall was enormous. It was so large that the sound of a single footstep could travel all the way to the far end and come back as a soft echo. The ceiling stretched so high above that it disappeared into a pale golden mist. The walls curved inward, lined with thousands of seats arranged in wide rings, and every seat was filled. 47 civilizations, 47 flags, 47 different kinds of faces, bodies, colors, and shapes, all gathered in one place. This was the Galactic Conclave, the oldest governing body in the known universe, and today, like every 2 years, it was holding its assembly. At the very center of the hall, standing at a small podium, was a human. He was 34 years old, not very tall, with short black hair and a plain gray uniform that had the small blue emblem of Earth sewn onto the left shoulder. He was not an ambassador. He was not a commander. He was a junior analyst, the kind of person who sits in the back of rooms and takes notes. The kind of person nobody looks at twice. But today, he had been given 5 minutes to speak. 5 minutes to present a report that he had spent 3 years writing. He cleared his throat and began. The purpose of this report, Day said, his voice calm and steady, is to formally flag the human species of the planet Earth as a long-term strategic concern for the stability of the Galactic Conclave. A few murmurs moved through the crowd. Not worried murmurs, curious ones, the kind people make when something slightly unusual happens, like a bird flying into a window. Day continued. He talked about human history, wars, survival, adaptation. He talked about how quickly humans learned, how they copied technology they barely understood and made it work anyway, how they had gone from wooden boats to nuclear reactors in under 400 years, how they had survived ice ages, plagues, famines, and conflicts that should have wiped them out completely, and how, in every single case, instead of disappearing, they had come back stronger. The human species, Day said, clicking to the final slide of his presentation, does not respond to pressure by breaking. They respond by adapting. In biological terms, in social terms, and in military terms, they are perhaps the most dangerous long-term variable this conclave has ever failed to take seriously. He finished. He stood there, hands at his sides, waiting. For a moment, the hall was completely quiet. Then, the laughter started. It was not mean laughter, not exactly. It was the kind of laughter that comes out of genuine disbelief. The kind of sound people make when they hear something so unexpected that their body reacts before their mind can stop it. It spread through the seats in waves, rippling from one delegation to the next. Different sounds from different species, clicks, whistles, low rumbles, sharp barks, but all of it meaning the same thing. You cannot be serious. Ambassador Rena of the Velhari Empire did not laugh. She was too polished for that. She simply leaned forward in her seat, folded her long pale fingers together, and looked at Day the way an adult looks at a child who has said something adorably wrong. "This is a Class II civilization," she said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber. "They are still burning chemical fuel for transportation on their own planet. They have no unified government. They have never left their own solar system without assistance. And you are presenting them to this assembly as a threat?" Another wave of quiet laughter. "Analyst Day," she continued, "with respect, your species is not a threat. Your species is a curiosity. A young, violent, short-lived curiosity. In another 200 years, they will either destroy themselves, or they will have grown enough to apply for basic observer status. Until then, I suggest we move on to actual concerns." Several delegations applauded. Day picked up his documents from the podium. He stacked them neatly. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply nodded once, turned, and walked out of the hall. Behind him, the assembly had already moved on. The corridor outside the chamber was long and quiet. Day walked slowly, his footsteps making small sounds on the polished floor. He was not angry. That was the thing about Day. He had come into this room knowing exactly what would happen, and it had happened exactly as he expected. He had still come. He had still presented the report, because somewhere, in some record, it would now exist. The warning had been given. It had been logged, and when the time came, and Day believed, deeply and without any doubt that the time would come, it would be there for anyone who wanted to go back and read it. He stopped at a wide observation window near the end of the corridor and looked out at space. Stars everywhere, cold, distant, beautiful. Somewhere in that direction, about 3 weeks of Valhari travel time away, was Earth. He thought about the people there, the cities, the noise, the arguments, the invention, the stubbornness, the endless, relentless drive to keep going no matter what. He thought about his grandmother, who used to say that the most dangerous person in any room was the one everyone had already stopped watching. He allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Then he put his documents under his arm and kept walking. Back on Earth, in a building that had no windows and no signs on the outside, Commander Tay sat behind a wide metal desk covered in reports, maps, and printed communications. He was 51 years old, broad-shouldered, with gray beginning to show at the sides of his hair. He commanded the Global Defense Initiative, a branch of Earth's military that officially did not exist in any public record, and unofficially had more budget than most countries admitted to spending on anything. A copy of Day's rejected report had arrived on his desk that morning. Tay read it slowly, all of it, every page, every footnote. He read the section on human adaptability. He read the section on military development. He read Rena's recorded response and the recorded laughter of the chamber. He read the words, curiosity, not threat, and he underlined them with a red pen. Then he set the report down, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Eventually, he picked up a pen and wrote 3 words at the top of the first page. Good. Keep going. He closed the report, put it in a locked drawer, and went back to work. Outside, the world moved. People drove to jobs. Children went to school. Markets opened. Arguments were had. Songs were written. Bridges were built. The ordinary machinery of human life kept turning, loud and messy and unstoppable. Nobody on Earth knew they had just been laughed at by 47 civilizations. And if they had known, most of them probably would have shrugged, made a joke about it, and gone right back to work. That, more than anything Day had put in his report, was exactly the point. Aliens called humans threatening. Sooner or later, the day they needed us arrived. Part 2, the ones they underestimated. 10 years passed. In those 10 years, the Galactic Conclave held 5 assemblies, approved 32 new trade agreements, admitted 2 new civilizations into full membership, and rejected Earth's application for observer status 3 separate times. The first rejection cited insufficient technological development. The second cited political instability. The third gave no reason at all, which was in many ways the most honest answer. Earth noted all 3 rejections, filed them away, and kept working. The lab where Yuna worked had no name on the door. It was on the 4th floor of a research facility built into the side of a mountain in a part of the country where the winters were long and the roads were narrow, and most people had no idea the building existed. She had slept there, some nights, on a folding cot she kept behind her desk. She had eaten cold meals and missed family gatherings and forgotten birthdays, not because she was careless, but because the thing she was building demanded everything, and she gave it everything, because she believed it mattered. The thing she was building was called a fold drive. In simple terms, it bent space. Instead of traveling through the distance between 2 points, it created a shortcut, a fold in the fabric of space itself, so that a ship could step from one side of a vast region to the other in a fraction of the normal time. The Velhari had a version of this technology. So did 2 other conclave species. But their versions were slow to charge, required enormous energy, and could only be used in open space far from any gravitational body. They were also limited. Yuna's version was none of those things. On a Tuesday morning in the middle of winter, with snow pressing against the small, high window of her lab, Yuna ran the final simulation. She watched the numbers appear on her screen. She read them twice. Then she sat very still for almost a full minute, because the numbers were telling her that her full drive could cross the Keras Nebula, a 3-week journey by Velhari standard, in just under 6 hours. She picked up her phone and called Commander Tay. He answered on the second ring. "It works," she said. There was a pause. Then Tay said, "How fast?" 6 hours. Keras crossing. Another pause. Longer this time. "Don't write that down anywhere yet," he said quietly. "Not anywhere that connects to a network. Come see me at the end of the week." She agreed. She looked at the numbers on her screen one more time, then shut the monitor off and started packing her notes into a physical folder by hand. On the other side of the country, in a workshop that looked from the outside like an ordinary vehicle repair garage, a man named Minho was taking something apart. It was a piece of Velhari technology, a fragment of an energy weapon recovered from a probe that had crashed in a remote region 4 years earlier. The Conclave had sent a recovery team, but by the time they arrived, the crash site had already been carefully picked clean by Earth's recovery units. What the Conclave got back was a shell. What Minho got was everything that mattered. He had spent 4 years studying it. He was not a formally trained weapons engineer. His background was in industrial energy systems, the kind of work that involved making powerful things run efficiently in difficult conditions. He had looked at the Velhari weapon and seen not a marvel of alien technology, but a solution to a problem he already understood. It was, at its core, a focused energy release system. Complicated? Yes. Built from materials Earth didn't yet produce at scale? Yes. But the underlying principle was something he had worked with for most of his professional life. So, he had rebuilt it, from scratch, using components that Earth could manufacture, using methods that Earth already had. It had taken 4 years and 12 failed prototypes, and the successful version sat on his workbench now, smaller than the original, and, based on his calculations, approximately 40% more efficient. He had not told many people. He had told Tay. Tay had told him to keep going and keep quiet. Minho kept going and kept quiet. The Conclave intelligence report arrived at Rena's desk on a gray morning when she was already tired from a long session on border disputes. She almost set it aside to read later. Something about the cover page made her stop. She read the title, she read it again, then she sat down and read the whole thing. The report was brief, clinical. It described in neutral diplomatic language 2 developments detected by Conclave surveillance satellites positioned in Earth's outer solar system. The first was a sustained series of spatial distortion readings consistent with early fold drive testing, originating from a location in Earth's northern hemisphere. The second was an energy discharge signature detected from a ground-based location, a signature that matched with minor variation the output profile of a Class 4 Velhari directed energy weapon. The report concluded with a single recommendation: increase surveillance coverage. No action required at this time. Rena set the report down. She thought about the junior analyst, the plain gray uniform. She thought about the laughter in the chamber, and about her own voice saying the words, curiosity, not threat. She picked up her pen and wrote a note to her senior staff requesting an expanded intelligence brief on human military development over the past decade. She sent it. Then she went back to the border dispute session and did not mention the report to anyone. She told herself it was probably nothing. Young civilizations experimented, copied things. It didn't mean anything. But the thought did not entirely go away. On Earth, Tay received word that 2 additional conclave surveillance satellites had appeared in the outer solar system. His team had already cataloged them within 48 hours of their deployment. He read the notification, circled the number 2 on the margin of the page, and added it to a growing file he kept locked in the same drawer as Day's old report. He was not angry about the satellites. He was not even surprised. He called a meeting with his senior staff that afternoon. Yuna, Minho, and 4 others whose names appeared in no public document. And he told them the same thing he had been telling them for years. "They are watching us because they are starting to wonder," he said. "That is good. That means we are doing something right. But wondering is not the same as respecting. And respecting is not the same as needing. We wait until they need us. That is the only moment that counts." Nobody argued. They had heard versions of this before. They believed it because Tay believed it, and because the evidence of the past 10 years had given them every reason to. The meeting ended. They went back to work. The satellites watched from above, cold and silent, far out in the dark. Earth did not wave at them. Earth did not hide from them. Aliens called humans, threatening, sooner or later. The day they needed us arrived. Part 3, Sooner or Later. Nobody had seen the Dravak swarm coming. That was the thing that made it so terrifying. Not just what it was, but how it arrived. No warning, no signal, no detectable movement in the weeks before. One day, the outer monitoring posts of the Conclave's eastern frontier sent back normal readings. The next day, 2 of those posts simply stopped transmitting, then 3 more, then a dozen. By the time the Conclave's command stations understood what was happening, the Dravak swarm had already consumed everything within a 6-light-year radius of the frontier and was moving inward. The swarm was not a fleet. It was not an army in any sense the Conclave had military doctrine for. It was a hive, a living, moving mass of biological machines that ate everything in its path: metal, atmosphere, organic matter. It absorbed what it could use and destroyed what it could not. 2 civilizations in the outer rim had already been erased by it. Their planets were hollow shells now, stripped to rock. Their people did not exist anymore. There were no refugees because the swarm did not leave survivors. It did not negotiate. It did not pause. It did not fear anything the Conclave had yet pointed at it. And now it was heading toward the core systems. The emergency session of the Galactic Conclave was called with less than 12 hours' notice. Representatives arrived in a state that none of them were accustomed to. Rushed, pale, unpolished. Rena took her seat and looked around the chamber. 47 delegations. Every face she saw wore some version of the same expression. Not the controlled, careful expression of diplomats. The open, raw expression of people who were afraid. General Kona of the Velhari military stood at the central podium. He was a large, broad figure who had spent 40 years in uniform and had never, in Rena's memory, looked uncertain. He looked uncertain now. He presented the trajectory projections. The swarm's current path, if unchanged, would reach the first of the Conclave's core systems in approximately 90 days. The combined military fleet of all 47 Conclave members, positioned at the most advantageous defensive point along that path, was projected to hold the swarm for 11 days. 11 days. The chamber absorbed this in silence. An analyst from one of the smaller delegations raised a hand and asked whether that projection assumed full cooperation between all member fleets. Kona said yes. The analyst asked what the projection looked like without full cooperation. Kona paused. Then he said, 7 days. Someone in the upper seats made a sound. Not quite a word, not quite a cry. Just a sound. The sound of something giving way inside. Rena looked at her hands on the table. 11 days. Against something that had consumed 2 civilizations without slowing down. 11 days. And that was if everything went perfectly. If every ship showed up. If every commander followed orders. If every system held. She had spent 40 years in diplomacy. She had negotiated trade deals and border agreements and complex treaties involving 7 languages and 4 different concepts of time. She had never, in those 40 years, felt genuinely helpless. She felt it now. The session ran for 9 hours. Plans were proposed and discarded. Evacuation routes were mapped for the most populated core worlds, though nobody said out loud what everyone was thinking, that there was nowhere far enough to evacuate to if the swarm kept moving after the fleet was gone. A research team presented a theoretical weapon system that might be effective against Dravak bioarmor. The research team estimated 4 years to develop it. Nobody laughed, but the silence had the same feeling as laughter. It was during a short recess, delegates milling in the corridors, speaking in low voices, some of them on communications back to their home governments, that a young aide from the Velhari delegation approached Rena quietly. The aide's name was Baum. She was 26, recently assigned, still new enough to say things that more experienced people had learned not to say. "Ambassador," she said, keeping her voice low, "there is a civilization whose full drive technology allows transit time 6 times faster than ours. There is a civilization that has independently replicated our own directed energy weapons and improved them by 40%. There is a civilization that has been quietly building a military force for at least a decade while being denied conclave membership." Rena looked at her. "We have not asked them." The corridor was noisy around them, the sound of dozens of conversations, the shuffling of feet, the distant hum of the building's environmental systems. Rena stood in the middle of it and felt the words land. She knew immediately which civilization Baum meant. She also knew, immediately, everything that asking would cost, the admission it would require, the position it would put the conclave in, the look on the faces of the other 46 delegations when the request was made. She thought about the chamber 10 years ago. She thought about her own voice. Curiosity, not threat. She thought about the laughter she had not stopped, and in some ways had led. "Leave it with me," she said. Baum nodded and walked away. Rena went back into the session hall before the recess ended. She sat in her seat and listened to 2 more hours of proposals that solved nothing. She watched Kona stand at the front of the room with the posture of a man holding a wall up with his body, knowing the wall would fall eventually, and just trying to hold it a little longer. When the session finally closed for the night, she stayed in her seat until the hall was almost empty. Then she took out a piece of paper, actual paper, which she rarely used, and wrote a single line. She read it. Then she folded the paper, put it in her inner pocket, and sat there a moment longer. Around her, the enormous hall was quiet. The 1,000 seats were empty. The flags of 47 civilizations hung still in the recycled air. It was the same room where 10 years ago a young man in a plain gray uniform had stood at that podium and been laughed at. Rena thought about his face as he had collected his papers. No anger, no hurt. Just that quiet, knowing look of someone who understood exactly what was happening, and had already decided it didn't matter, because he was going to be proved right eventually. Sooner or later, she stood up. She straightened her coat. She walked to the door. Tomorrow she would make the call. Tonight she needed to figure out how to say the words without choking on them. It was going to be the hardest conversation of her career. She suspected the human on the other end of the line would make it very, very calm. Aliens called humans threatening. Sooner or later, the day they needed us arrived. Part 4. The call they had to make. The transmission request came in at 0340 Earth Standard Time. The officer on duty at the Global Communications Center stared at the incoming signal for a moment, confirmed the origin point, confirmed it again, and then picked up the secure line to Commander Tay's quarters. Tay answered before the second ring. He listened to the 4 words the officer said. Then he told her to accept the transmission, told her to clear the room of all non-essential personnel, and told her he would be there in 8 minutes. He was there in 6. The communications room was a long, low space filled with screens and equipment that hummed quietly in the dark. Tay arrived, still buttoning his collar, his hair not quite settled, the only version of unpolished that anyone who knew him had ever seen. He sat down in the main chair, looked at the transmission screen, and nodded to the officer to open the channel. The face that appeared was Velhari. Long features, pale complexion, the formal expression of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say many times, and still wasn't sure they could get through it. It was not Rena. It was a senior envoy named Vel, which Tay noted because it meant Rena had not been willing to make the first call herself. She had sent someone. He filed that away. Vel introduced himself. He explained, in the careful, flattened language of formal diplomacy, that the Galactic Conclave was facing a crisis of significant magnitude. He described the Dravak swarm. He described the fleet projections. He described the timeline. He was thorough and precise, and his voice only wavered once, very briefly, when he stated the 11-day estimate. Tay listened to all of it, without moving. Then Vel said, "The Conclave is reaching out to Earth to formally request military assistance." Tay looked at the screen. He let the silence sit there for a moment. Not to be dramatic. He genuinely needed the moment to think clearly, because the next words he said would matter enormously. "Hold the line," he said. He stood up, walked to the corner of the room, and made a short call on a different device. 2 minutes later, a door at the far end of the room opened, and Day walked in. He had clearly been awake. He was fully dressed, which meant he had probably not slept. He crossed the room, glanced at the screen, looked at Tay. Tay gave him the briefest possible summary. Day absorbed it, asked one clarifying question about the timeline, received the answer, and then pulled a chair next to Tay's and sat down. They both returned to the screen. Vel was still waiting, expression carefully composed. Tay spoke first. "Before we discuss anything operational, there are conditions." Vel's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. "We expected there might be." "Full membership in the Galactic Conclave," Tay said. "Effective immediately. Not pending review, not provisional. Full membership, full voting rights, full access." "Agreed," Vel said, without pause. Tay continued. "Unrestricted trade rights with all member civilizations. Removal of all Conclave surveillance assets from Earth's solar system and surrounding space within 30 days of the end of this crisis." "Agreed." All 3 previous membership rejections officially struck from the galactic record and replaced with a single notation that the applications were denied without legitimate cause. "Agreed." Tay glanced at Day. Day looked at the screen and spoke for the first time. "One more condition," Day said. His voice was calm and even and carried no heat in it. "A formal statement of apology, read into the galactic record by Ambassador Rena personally, acknowledging that the threat assessment report submitted to the Conclave 11 years ago was dismissed without adequate consideration. The apology will name the report. It will name me. It will be public." The silence that followed this was longer than the others. Vel's composed expression held, but held in the way that something holds when it is being pressed hard from the other side. I will need to confirm that final condition with, "You already have authorization," Day said simply. "Otherwise you wouldn't be on this call." Another pause. Then, "Agreed." Tay nodded once. "Then we will assist. Transmit all tactical data on the swarm's current position, movement patterns, and the locations of your fleet assets. We will need it within 6 hours." "It will be sent within 2, Vel said. Something in his voice had changed, still formal, but underneath the formality, something that sounded almost like relief. The channel closed. Tay stood up immediately and started moving. He called 7 people in the space of 10 minutes, fleet commanders, logistics chiefs, Yuna, Minho. He called the facility where the full drive ships were held, and told them to begin pre-launch preparation. He called the weapons storage site, and told them the same. He was already 3 steps into the next phase before most of his team had fully processed that the call had happened at all. Yuna arrived at the communications room 20 minutes later, still pulling her jacket on. She had received Tay's call mid-sleep, and driven to the facility at a speed she would not admit to out loud. She found Day standing at the far window, looking out at the pre-dawn dark. "They actually called," she said. "Yes," Day said. "And we said yes," she said. "We said yes on our terms," he said. He turned from the window. "That's different." Yuna thought about the full drive. 6 years of her life. Cold food, missed sleep, the long winters. All the mornings she had sat in her lab and run the numbers again because she needed to be sure. She had built it because Tay had asked her to build it. And she had believed in Tay, and she had believed in the idea that one day it would matter in a way that was larger than herself. She had always thought that day would feel significant when it came. Ceremonial. Something. It felt like a Tuesday. "How long do we have?" she asked. "The fleet needs to be jump-ready in 72 hours, Tay said, walking past her toward the door. "Which means you have 60. She turned and followed him. "That's not a lot of time." "No," he agreed. "Get started." Minho received his orders at dawn. He spent the first hour doing calculations. He spent the next hour reviewing weapons inventory and running output tests on 12 of the energy weapon systems his team had built over the past several years. The results were consistent with what he already knew. The weapons worked, they were stable, and they hit harder than anything the Velhari had given the Conclave fleet. He found himself thinking, briefly, about the crashed Velhari probe, about the 4 years he had spent taking it apart and putting something better back together from simpler pieces. He had never been angry about the trade embargo, not exactly. He had treated it the way he treated any problem, as a constraint to work around. He had worked around it very thoroughly. He pulled on his work jacket and went to join his team. By the time the sun had fully risen over the mountain facility, 70 people were already at their stations. Lights were on in every building. Vehicles moved across the compound in the early light. The full drive ships sat in their hangars like something patient, something that had been waiting for a long time and was finally done waiting. Tay stood at the top of a metal staircase and watched it all from above for a moment before going in. The Conclave's tactical data had arrived as promised in under 2 hours. He had already read most of it. The Dravak swarm was enormous. The timeline was tight. The Conclave fleet was outmatched, and they knew it. But 72 hours from now, the human expeditionary fleet would fold into position, and the swarm had absolutely no idea what was coming. Tay allowed himself one moment, just one, to feel the weight of it. 11 years, Day's report on a podium, the laughter, the rejections, every quiet year of building something nobody was supposed to see, until the moment was exactly right. The moment was now. Aliens called humans. Threatening. Sooner or later, the day they needed us arrived. Part 5, the day we arrived. The Conclave fleet had been holding position for 9 hours when the fold signatures appeared. They came without warning. Not because the humans were trying to be dramatic, but because the fold drive did not produce the long detectable charge-up signal that conclave ships required before a jump. There was no slow build, no energy spike that gave 15 minutes of warning. One moment, the space around the conclave's defensive line was empty. The next moment, it was not. 44 ships, human ships. They appeared in tight formation, directly between the conclave fleet and the forward edge of the Dravok swarm, at a distance from the swarm's mass that every Velhari tactical officer in the fleet immediately recognized as too close. The minimum safe engagement distance for any conclave vessel against the swarm was 300 kilometers. The human ships had appeared at 40. General Kona, watching from the bridge of the Velhari command vessel, leaned forward and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, very quietly, "They came out of fold, inside the engagement zone." His tactical officer looked at him. "Sir, that's not—" "I know," he said. "Watch." Commander Tay's voice was steady through every ship in the human fleet. "Formation hold, weapon systems live. Yuna, confirm fold stability." From the engineering bay of the flagship, Yuna's voice came back immediately. "All ships stable, drive ready for secondary fold, on your mark." "Good, Minho." "Weapons are hot," Minho said from his station. "Targets acquired." Tay looked at the display in front of him. The swarm filled most of it. A dark, churning mass that moved with the horrible, patient momentum of something that had never been stopped before, and therefore did not believe it could be. It was vast. Up close, it was even more vast than the intelligence reports had suggested. It moved like weather, like a storm, with a direction and a purpose. Tay had looked at difficult things before. He looked at this one the same way. "All ships," he said. "We go straight in. Target the forward mass. We are cutting corridors, not engaging broadly. Focus fire. Keep moving. Do not stop." 44 ships accelerated toward the swarm. The first thing the conclave fleet noticed was the weapons. The human energy weapons, when fired, produced a visible effect on the Dravok bioarmor that the Velhari weapons did not. Where Velhari directed energy struck the swarm's outer mass, it scorched and disrupted, but did not penetrate deeply. The bioarmor absorbed and redistributed the energy too quickly. Minho's weapons did not give the armor time to redistribute. The discharge was faster, sharper, and hit at a frequency that the biomaterial could not adapt to quickly enough. Where human weapons fired, the swarm's mass did not hold. It came apart. Kona watched from his bridge as the human ships drove into the forward edge of the swarm, firing in coordinated bursts, burning corridors through the mass the way a blade cuts through something dense. The swarm reacted. It always reacted. It had no choice but to react. And portions of it surged toward the human ships, trying to engulf them the way it had engulfed every other threat it had ever encountered. The human ships folded. Not away. Sideways. They jumped laterally, short range, inside the engagement zone, reappearing on the flanks of the mass that had moved toward them, and continued firing. The swarm mass that had surged forward found nothing there. Before it could reorient, the human ships were already behind it, cutting deeper. Kona's tactical officer was keeping up a steady, quiet narration of what she was seeing, because her mind needed words to process it. "They're using short-range fold jumps tactically. They're not retreating. They're repositioning inside the swarm's own reaction pattern. It can't track them fast enough." "No," Kona said. "It can't." He thought about the projection from the assembly. 11 days. He had privately thought 7. He watched the human fleet cut a second corridor through the swarm's forward mass, burning and folding and burning again, never still long enough to be surrounded. He revised his estimate. It was Bora, a young engineer on the flagship's secondary systems team, who came up with the shield modification. She had been watching the swarm's response pattern for 2 hours, and had noticed that it concentrated its surge toward ships based on their energy output. High energy output attracted more of the swarm. She ran the math, checked it quickly with the officer next to her, and then called Tay directly. "Commander, if we reroute the shield harmonics to emit on the same frequency as the fold drive discharge, we can make the swarm read us as jump points rather than targets. It won't ignore us, but it will hesitate. 3 to 5 seconds per surge." Tay did not ask her to check again. "Do it. All ships." The modification took 11 minutes to push across the fleet. Once it was running, the effect was immediate. The swarm surge response slowed. Not much, 3 seconds on average, sometimes 4. But 3 seconds, for a ship with a fold drive, was more than enough. The Conclave fleet, watching from position, saw the human ships begin to move with a fluidity that had no equivalent in any tactical manual any of them had ever trained on. 31 hours after the human fleet arrived, the Dravok swarm reversed direction. It did not do this because it was defeated. The swarm did not understand defeat in any conceptual sense. It reversed because the thing it had come to consume was costing more energy to pursue than it was returning in material. The forward mass had been cut apart. The edges had been burned back repeatedly. The patterns it relied on to engulf and absorb were being disrupted in ways it had no response for. And then, slowly, it turned. On the Conclave command bridge, nobody spoke for almost a full minute after the movement was confirmed. Then Kona exhaled a long, slow breath and sat down in his chair for the first time in 31 hours. An officer said, very softly, "They stopped it." Nobody replied. Nobody needed to. The assembly session that followed, 3 days later, was different from any session Rena had attended before. It was quieter. People took their seats without the usual shuffling and side conversations. There was a weight to the room that had not been there in ordinary sessions. The weight of something that had happened, something that could not be taken back or reworded. Rena stood at the central podium. She had written and rewritten what she was going to say 12 times. In the end, she had put all 12 versions away and decided to say only what was true in the simplest words she could find. She said that 11 years ago, a report had been submitted to this assembly by a human analyst. She said that the report had been dismissed. She said that the dismissal had been wrong, not wrong because events had since proved it correct, but wrong at the time, on the merits, because the assembly had allowed its assumptions about a young civilization to override a careful and well-supported argument. She said that this assembly owed an apology to the man who had written that report, and to the civilization he had come to represent, and that the apology was being entered into the galactic record now today, in full. She said the name of the report. She said the name of the analyst. Then she said, "I am sorry." The chamber was very still. In the human delegation seats, Day sat with his hands folded on the table. He listened to every word. His expression did not change. When Rena finished and looked toward the human delegation, he gave her a single slow nod. Not warm, not cold, simply an acknowledgement, the kind of nod that says, "This is noted, we can move forward now." Rena returned to her seat. After the session ended and the hall began to empty, Kona crossed the floor and stopped in front of Day. The old general was not a person who found words easy. He was a person of numbers and maps and direct orders. He stood there for a moment, looking for what to say. He settled on the truth. "Your people fight differently," he said. "I have been in this work for 40 years. I have never seen anything like it." Day looked up at him. "We had a long time to prepare." Kona nodded slowly. "Yes." He paused. "What would you have done if we had never called?" Day considered this for a moment, kept building, and waited. Kona looked at him for another moment. Then he nodded one more time, turned, and walked away. Outside, in orbit above the Conclave's central station, the human fleet held formation. Quiet, steady, waiting for the order to return home. Tay sat on the bridge of the flagship, looking out at the stars. He thought about the report in the locked drawer. He thought about Yuna's lab in the winter. He thought about Minho in his workshop, with the pieces of a Velhari weapon spread across a table, patient and unhurried, building something better. He thought about how the galaxy had looked at Earth for decades and seen something small. He thought about everything that small thing had done in the quiet years while nobody was watching. He reached forward and opened the return navigation. Home was 3 weeks away by Velhari standard. By fold drive, it was 4 hours. He set the course. He leaned back. "All ships," he said into the fleet channel. "We're going home." 43 confirmations came back, one after another. Clear voices, steady voices. The voices of people who had gone where they were asked to go and done what they had gone to do. The full drives charged, space bent, and the human fleet stepped across the distance between the stars the way they had always moved through every hard thing, directly and without hesitation. They had called humans threatening. Sooner or later, they had been right. And sooner or later, they had needed to be.